Hello and good afternoon, everyone watching, tuning in. Welcome to the March 2022 edition of Law Chat. I'm Simon Tupman, I'm the convener, and each month we have conversations with luminaries from the legal sector offering insights and inspiration. And each month these chats are brought to you by Moore Markham's accountants and business advisors offering specialist financial services to the legal profession. And today's topic is tackling the Great Resignation. This phrase, the Great Resignation, seems to have become de rigueur in recent months. And I have to confess, it was only fairly recently that I discovered the origins of this phrase, but it was coined by Professor Anthony Klotz from the Mays Business School in Texas, who was a professor there only last year. And all of a sudden, we find that this phrase is on the tips of the tongues of most HR managers and leaders of law firms and businesses worldwide. So I wanted somebody on Law Chat today who could talk with some degree of authority about how we can best tackle this challenge to our workplace. And I'm delighted to be joined by Lythan Chapman today. Lythan started life off as a lawyer in the UK. And since then, she, I suppose, like myself, is a recovering lawyer, but she morphed into a business growth specialist. She's based in New Zealand, but she brings years of experience working across continents and cultures and industries to partner these days with industries and organizations to help them with their branding and communication strategies. Lythan, thanks for joining us on Law Chat.
Simon, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, great to have you. The Great Resignation, what is it?
It's really interesting. I came across the phrase a little bit like you. I sort of stumbled across it. I did a little web search yesterday and I plugged in the Great Resignation. And to my surprise, within less than half a second, 2.2 billion results came up on the screen. There's been some work done as sort of this Great Resignation sort of flowed through America. It's gone through Europe. And if you speak to HR teams and you speak to recruiters, they will tell you that its impact has certainly been felt in New Zealand as well. I know that resignations and people looking for new jobs is something which is keeping our recruiters very busy at the moment. So there's been an awful lot of turnover. And I think where this is coming from, perhaps, is we've all been at home for the last 2 years, coping with a pandemic and things which were perhaps a little bit frightening and scary for us 2 years ago. The idea of suddenly, working from home and being cut off from your office environment. But we did it. And on the whole, we were quite resilient and we coped. And I think those questions that were going through people's mind were really, well, if where I work is sort of no longer an issue, if I can cope with that, well, maybe there are other things which I also need to reflect on. And I think people started to think about, why am I doing this? What's my purpose? Where do I see my future? What's my vision? Where do I want to go? And what is it that I believe in? What are my values? And do those values still match the values that are inherent in my firm? And if suddenly you start thinking about those things, because you're no longer on the treadmill sort of going into work and coming back and thinking about your next day's work. So I think all of us have sort of undergone, without even noticing it, sort of an internal sort of personal brand journey, even if we didn't realize that's what we were doing. And I think when you start thinking very carefully about these things, if there is not a good fit with your firm, you might find that when you go back to work, the things which you thought were important are perhaps no longer important. The things that you were perhaps a little bit frightened of trying, perhaps moving to a new job, no longer seem quite so challenging. And I think that's probably fueled a lot of this desire for change and a desire to move.
So it's almost as though the debate isn't just about work, but it's about life generally, and people sort of reflecting on their existence and, what's the point of doing what I'm doing at the moment? And, time is precious, and how am I going to make the most of my life?
That's right. I think we're quite used to sort of this idea of sort of work-life balance. And I think, people have been working quite a lot in that area trying to make, that transition. But I think it's gone beyond that. I think there's also a blurring of lines, if you like, between what I hold dear and where I'm going to be going with my career. And if what you hold dear is no longer fitting in with your vision of the future, I think people are reflecting on that and trying to find a better work environment. There was a survey that's just come out, it was in the UK, it was by a career counselling provider called Zeti, and they interviewed people who just left their jobs. And what they found is that, yes, 67% of those that were leaving were looking for better benefits and more remuneration, and there is obviously a driver there. But 62% were actually looking for a match with their own personal values. So a firm's values has suddenly become one of the main driving factors to push someone to look for a new job, but also to pull that new recruit in, because they're looking very closely at how they are going to fit in with your culture. And
Yep.
culture's become very, very important.
Indeed, last month's guest on Law Chat, Nigel Haddon, was talking about culture as probably being the number one challenge for law firm leaders at the moment in terms of investing in the culture and making sure that it's a good fit for the people who are working there.
Yes, I mean, a lot of firms have undertaken some form of a brand strategy. I mean, it tends to be that they go to the end of the journey, which is they look at logos and colours, as opposed to the start of the journey, sort of the brand core, which is all about your purpose, your vision, and your values. But at some point, most firms have thought about it and considered, what it is that they do, what's their purpose. I know you actually said that you actually asked a conference of lawyers once, can you tell us, what is it that drives you? What's your purpose? And you had a fluttering of hands and somebody said, well, it's to make money. And of course, I think we've moved on from that. I think people actually need to know that it's not just necessarily about making money. You need something stronger to actually pull you through. Otherwise, we're all going to get very tired and we're going to get fatigued and we're going to get burnout. So I think what's happened and what is happening is that firms have sort of gone from being quite firm-centric or even partner-centric, and they're now having to look outside of that. And we've already heard people talking about being more client-centric and what is it that our clients want, what's important to them. But there's that third bit that's sort of missing, and it's actually aligning the values that we've got within our firm to the values and goals and vision of the people that work for us. And what we will find is if we can align those three, we can actually provide a focus where you've actually got a very engaged and motivated team, and you're actually all pulling in the same direction. And the clients are actually going to respond to that because you've suddenly got a team that is on brand, it's consistent, it's genuine, it's focused. And when you've got those kind of things happening within your firm, of course, you're going to be much more productive and ultimately much more profitable. So I think it's actually one of those things, it's been overlooked. I think we've been very sort of firm-centric. And I think it's a sort of a human-centric approach is coming of age.
It seems to me that this is another example of the balance of power shifting. We've seen it with clients and how, of course, they've got more choice in terms of who their legal services provider might be, and that they tend to call the shots when it comes to how they want their service to be delivered and in terms of pricing and so on. And in the same way, this other body of stakeholders called colleagues who come to work and give up a large percentage of their lives to work for their organizations are now the ones who are increasingly calling the shots. Is that a fair assessment?
I think so. It's one of those things, when you look at sort of people joining the profession, we sort of give them normally they come in and they might do an intern program and they're fated with trips on kayaks and everything's wonderful. And then they join the firm and they're sort of plugged into the system and they become little 6-minute batteries. And the next thing you find on this journey is at some point, hopefully somebody might tap you on the shoulder and say, we're thinking about progressing you to partnership. What's your business plan? And between sort of starting off and learning the ropes and becoming the best lawyer you can possibly be and being tapped on the shoulder to be a partner, there's really very little help given on actually what it means to be in the business of law, not just a lawyer, but actually being in the business of law. And I think people are beginning to recognize that much earlier in their career. They're actually looking for guidance. They're looking for ways in which they can actually be educated and to be valued and trusted and respected so that they can actually become not just better lawyers, but actually better business people. Yeah, and I think that's something which is happening much more much more rounded. And that's happening now at a much younger stage. We talk about millennials. Well, the oldest millennials are now 40 years old. So, these people are no longer saying, we've got a work personality and a home personality and we'll bring something to the work environment. You're dealing with people who actually want to be treated in the round. They actually want to be developed, not just as great lawyers, but, they want to learn other skills. They want to learn about what it actually means to be a great business person.
It's interesting when we think about the impact that COVID's had. Of course, it's been widespread around the world, affecting all industries. And at the moment, it seems to me that a lot of industries are suffering more than the legal profession or the legal services industry. I'm thinking like hotels, hospitality, tourism, waiters, and so on. And particularly a lot of those people who might be temporarily vested in their employers rather, it's quite easy for them to snap their fingers and say, I'm off to London or I'm going to live in another part of the world. The question I want to ask you is, do you think that law firms are as susceptible to the Great Resignation as a great many other industries who are experiencing the impact of it? For example, you mentioned to me when we were talking about Law Chat a few weeks ago, the IBA Young Lawyers Survey. That had some starting statistics, didn't it? For
that came out. They did a young lawyer report. It came out in January of this year, and the IBA is a global organisation. And what they said was that 50% of those people that they spoke to were looking to move their job within the next 12 months. Of those, I think 1 in 3 were looking to go to another law firm, but 1 in 5 were actually thinking about leaving the profession altogether. And they talked about work-life balance. They talked about things like career development and hindrances to career development. And when you then layer on top where we are in New Zealand, which is we've had 2 years of our young lawyers not being able to do their traditional OE, going off to New York or London or Sydney. There's a drive, I think, for those people to go, well, actually the borders are now opening. I can now do my OE. So we're going to potentially lose some of them. And then we've also got people. I spoke to somebody from the British Consulate General yesterday, and she said the visa applications are up hugely because London firms are actually offering more money. It's quite exciting to travel. And actually things like cost of living, surprisingly, are actually cheaper in the UK than they are in Auckland. You can actually potentially go and buy or rent a house in the UK, whereas that's proving to be quite a challenge in the Auckland market. So there are a lot of drivers for our young to actually think about moving. But actually the thing about the Great Resignation is it seems to be happening more to people who are more established in their careers. So the cost to a business of actually losing somebody young is about a third. You've got to pay for recruitment. There's time that's taken up from partners. You've got to get them trained. Reputational damage because, the clients then have to get used to a new team member. There's all sorts of problems associated with that and costs. But when you think about losing somebody who's perhaps 5 years qualified or 7 years qualified or even a partner, well, then the cost of actually replacing somebody like that is actually a real business expense. You might actually be losing clients as well as that body of knowledge. And the Great Resignation seems to be affecting that level within the profession much more perhaps than actually the youngsters coming through. There are other push and pull factors for the youngsters, but it seems to be much more these personal factors, these value questions that are affecting people who are a little bit further on in their careers.
So we've got a number of causes driving this resignation. We've got job dissatisfaction, possibly underinvestment in the culture by law firm leaders, leading to unpleasant, toxic workplaces, overwork. We have the lure of working overseas, for perhaps better conditions, the opportunity perhaps to buy a property. Put all this in the pot, and it's very, very dynamic. So if I'm a law firm leader or a partner thinking, holy crap, I'm at risk of losing some good lawyers, not just juniors, but maybe some seniors. What do you consider to be some of the solutions to tackling this risk of great resignation?
Well, I think one of the things you can think about doing, we're sort of quite familiar with the idea of perhaps an exit interview, and we work out why somebody might be leaving. And that's useful, and you can feed that back into policies. But one of the things you could think about doing is actually having a stay interview and actually ask people
like that
why they might like to stay with you. What is it that they actually do? What can we do better? What is it that perhaps is maybe a challenge for you? And if we go back to sort of values as well, it might actually be really interesting. One, to ask your team, do you know what our values are? I've sometimes done that, and the results are somewhat startling. And people sort of mumble maybe two, and then kind of lose it because the values aren't really entrenched. The next thing you can start thinking about is, if these are our values, what do they actually mean to you? How do they resonate with you as a person? And if somebody finds it very difficult to say, oh, yes, I understand that because to me that means, and therefore I'm buying into that. If they find that difficult, it means you've actually probably got a disconnect. And as humans, we're very good at finding a disconnect. When we talk about relationships that we might have with people, we try and find things which are familiar. We try and find things which bind us together. When we start finding cracks, we're very good at actually sort of exposing them, and actually we start to think about why is it that things aren't working? Why is it that I don't have a fit? And that, of course, can lead to sort of problems with your culture, and it can actually lead to dissatisfaction. And ultimately, you might decide that you would like to leave. So I think it's having very honest conversations and actually trying to work out where your similarities are, where the fit is. And if you can start exploiting those and start coming up with a narrative as to why we're doing this, who we are, where we're going, and you can start binding people on that journey, then they're much more likely to stay. There was another survey actually that came out again in January of this year. It was an American survey, and so I'm just looking at the statistics. And it actually said that 94% of employees said that if a company was invested in helping them to learn, they would stay longer. And it was a sense of feeling appreciated, valued, and respected. And if you can show your team that they are appreciated, valued, and respected by talking to them, by listening to them, and by trying to work out ways in which you can develop them, then they're much more likely to stay. So I think sort of learning and culture and BD is no longer just sort of resigned to being a sort of HR issue. I think it's actually become a business issue, and it does actually affect your productivity, and it does actually affect how your clients view you. The last thing you want is for your staff to actually be dissatisfied, even worse, to actually leave you, because you actually do take a hit to your reputation. Your clients will observe this and wonder why.
Yes. I mean, I'm enjoying this conversation about values because I do understand where you're coming from in that, and I appreciate the importance, as I'm sure quite a few listeners today will. But I possibly, like you, have come across a number of skeptics or cynics who regard the whole values conversation as being far too abstract, whiffle waffle, and it really doesn't mean anything in our workplace. They want to see something tangible, both the employer and the employee. And I've also heard proponents who might say, okay, well, let's see values in action. So, for example, is a one-size-fits-all solution to this great resignation going to be appropriate, or should we be having a checklist of benefits that apply to working life and customize it for every individual that works in a firm that might deal with things such as, and I've written a list here, childcare, level of income that you want to earn, the amount of discretionary time that you might like to have as part of this role, the degree of training and development you want, so that people, HR managers, practice managers, managing partners can get a flavour, because we're all different, and
we're all different.
You try and put the square peg in the round hole.
Exactly. And we shouldn't be frightened. I mean, it sounds like an awful lot of work. HR people are going to be going, oh, no, please, this is just too much. But actually, if you don't do that, you're actually missing a valuable trick. And that is, if we can be encouraged to be unique, if our uniqueness can be marketed, then actually you've got a barrier for people trying to steal your valuable employees. But that person has also got a reason to go to market. If you can find out what it is that makes you unique and special, and that is a personal brand journey, then you'll find that you will have more confidence. People will react to that confidence both internally and externally. You will draw clients to you. You will be much more in demand. You will have much greater visibility, and therefore you will have much greater ability to earn an income. And I think the other thing about a personal brand journey is very few companies, very few firms in New Zealand actually have a very strong brand. When you think of sort of a magic circle firm, you go there and it doesn't necessarily matter which lawyer you might get because you are buying into the brand of a magic circle firm. Whereas in New Zealand, it's much more rests on the shoulder of the individual. The brand itself, the company brand, is not as strong, so much more rests on your team. So building them up and making them unique and making that a factor in the value proposition that you give your clients is a much more interesting way to go about building both your brand as a firm and the individuals.
So a quick question for you, because the vernacular that we use in the legal services market is changing and has changed over the last 25 years or so. And so even the use of the word brand for many lawyers is unusual. Is a synonym, would the word reputation be something that they might appreciate when you talk about brand?
Yes, it's one of the key components of any brand. If you think of a brand, you think of its reputation plus its visibility, and you need both. And reputation is about your skills, it's about your experience, but it's also about your character. It's about how you deliver the service. It's about your track record. It's about your quality of work. So reputation is a major part of not just the firm's brand, but actually your own brand.
Is it also a function of the client experience?
Absolutely. If you think about when you're doing business, and I say this a lot, people don't do business with a firm, they do business with an individual. And that individual they usually like. People like doing business with people they like, and it's somebody that they trust. And trust, if you like, is also a hugely important part of reputation. Without trust, you're not going to have much of a career, you're not going to have much of a reputation with your clients and internally.
So can I just go back to what I really loved you said earlier, the stay conversation. So how would a firm actually do that? Would they, I mean, if it was, say, a four-partner firm, for argument's sake, because, 65% of firms in New Zealand are probably 4 partners or less, probably bigger percentage than that off the top of my head. But, sometimes they sit down at lunch and they just nibble their sandwiches and the conversations go nowhere. Perhaps something like that is a wonderful opportunity to sit down and say, hey, listen, guys, we want to talk about ourselves.
Yeah, and actually, in a way, if you make it a very formal process, what you'll find is people will put sort of the veneer down and they'll consider what it is perhaps you want to hear. If you do it very informally and you start talking about why are we doing this? Where is it we want to go? What is it that we believe in? Can anyone name what our values are? And how is this making us unique? What is making us different from the 4-partner firm down the road? And if you just have very natural, organic conversations, actually, I think what you'll end up with is sort of lists of words that start developing. And the challenge then really is if we start talking about those lists of words that we're using to describe ourselves, you then have to sort of challenge yourself and say, okay, well, out of those 15 words that have come to the surface, we're maybe talking about trust or reliability or responsibility or integrity, which of those words are really resonate with us? And then challenge your staff and say, well, what does it mean to you? And if you're really brave, go out and challenge your clients and say, look, this is what we think we are. How does that resonate with you? Do you think we're like this? Because is that helpful to you? Does that add value? If we say we're reliable and responsible, in other words ending in able, what does that actually mean for you? And are we actually delivering? Because if you're not, then perhaps you need to rethink it.
Tell me, here's a quick question. Who's the best person to conduct that or to facilitate that stay conversation? Is it an outsider? Is it a member of the non-partner team, or is it a partner? The risk of perhaps the partner running it is that, are they going to tell the truth?
It's always the problem. It's one of those very difficult ones to actually answer honestly. Probably not the partner, unless it's somebody who is genuinely interested in getting the truth, because otherwise you'll just hear what somebody wants you to hear. If you bring somebody else, if you bring an external consultant, you can open the gateway. But you might also find there's that reluctance sometimes, like, why am I telling you this? I've been talking to my HR professional about these things for the last 5 years, and suddenly they're bringing you in, and it's, this is what I've been telling you guys for the last 5 years. There's that sort of sense of disconnect, which can actually cause a problem as well. But I think it's, provided the person who's asking the questions has a genuine desire to learn the truth and is open to the truth, I don't think it really matters who asks. I think the important thing is to start asking, to start actually communicating.
And probably connecting as well. I love that word too. And the emotional connection between boss and employee, I think, is becoming increasingly vital as a result of what's going on. And at the centre of that, I'm sure you'd agree, you alluded to the word trust there, is a sense of, if I do speak my mind to the boss, can I be trusted, or are there going to be ramifications if I say something that's remotely critical?
Well, if you... Trust is at the bottom of every single relationship we have, whether it's a loving relationship, whether it's a relationship with the client, whether it's a relationship within work. If you don't have a relationship based on trust, I hesitate to say that you've got much of a relationship at all. So trust is at the center of everything that we do. And if we are going back to basics and working out how we can actually build trust, that might be the first step that you might want to do before you actually go into some of these conversations which actually need trust as their basis. So if you don't feel that trust is part of your firm's relationship with the team or with the clients, then you actually need to address that one first. And what does that look like? What does trust look like in a law firm?
Absolutely. I suppose it's the same wherever you go, but it encourages a free flow of conversation and connection between people. 3 minutes to go, or 2 minutes to go. I've got a question coming in the Q&A here. How do we capitalise on the reverse of the Great Resignation? In other words, people coming here for their OE or Kiwis returning home? Good question.
In terms of people coming into your practice.
Okay, yeah, coming here to New Zealand to get overseas experience, or New Zealanders returning home. So, in other words, filling the vacuum, I guess.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly something which has happened. I think there was actually some statistically when COVID first struck, there was a vast inflow of returning New Zealanders. I think now the figures are showing that most people that came are actually thinking about leaving again. But yes, of course, if that is somewhere where you can fill up your pool of employees, that's fantastic. They'll bring lots of new experiences. They'll also challenge you because they've been abroad and they've seen how other people are doing things. So you have to be prepared to accept and trust that they are going to bring some changes into your firm.
That sounds to me like every cloud has a silver lining. And I suspect the Great Resignation may have one too.
I think so too. I think sometimes a blank sheet and working out where you're going to develop and move forward is actually a really exciting time. And maybe we are looking at some blank sheets in front of people at the moment.
Maybe shuffling the cards in the deck, as it were.
Yeah.
Well, listen, it's been great talking to you. Thank you. And it's amazing always how fast half an hour goes. But I very much appreciate it.
I think we could chat for another 2 hours quite happily.
It's a huge topic. And one that's dear to my heart, but I hope that those that are joining us or will be watching the recording of this will get some insights into some of the causes behind the Great Resignation and what some of the solutions might be, not least the stay conversation, which I think is a great starting point to better understand the motivations behind your people and what makes them want to work for your organisation in the first place. So on behalf of all the listeners and viewers of Law Chat, Lythan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Best of luck with your endeavours, and stay well, and I hope to catch up with you again soon.
It's been a pleasure, Simon. Thank you so much.
Great pleasure. We'll be back next month with Law Chat, but until then, go safe, everyone. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.